the new movie Shirley, directed by Josephine Decker. Um, I guess a fictionalized account of Shirley Jackson, the famous horror suspense writer from the 40s and 50s, famously wrote The Haunting of Hill House, which I think I reviewed on this podcast a couple of years ago. Starring Shirley Jackson is played by Elizabeth Moss, who, I mean, at this point, who could ever doubt Elizabeth Moss's chops? This girl can act, and she acts her ass off in this movie. And I think there's a lot to dig into here, but I think I just want to start off by asking you, do you know what the F happened in this movie?
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, going in, I haven't seen any of Josephine Decker's previous 3 films. This is her first one with any kind of major backing. This is a Neon film. It's on Hulu now. Would have had a theatrical release under different circumstances. And so I didn't realize that she's been tabbed as an experimental filmmaker before. But yeah, there's a lot of like dream sequency stuff and fantastical elements to the storytelling.
Yeah.
And the camera adds a lot to that in terms of stuff being fuzzy and the way it moves and stuff and claustrophobic and not. So it's not a traditional straightforward biopic, even if I guess the through line of what happens, quote unquote, is, I guess, pretty easy to comprehend once you understand it. But yeah, so I thought that it was cool to be a little more, have to pay more attention, right? And it reminds me a lot of Her Smell with Elizabeth Moss, because it's another one of those unhinged character performances from Moss, and she seems to be having a good time doing that. In this case, of course, it's based off a book, but I think it's a good movie.
Yeah, I think Her Smell is probably the performance that most people are kind of referring back to with this, and it makes a lot of sense. I think the difference is Her Smell, she's so like outlandishly out there, whereas in this, it's like this like burning insanity, burning ferocity right underneath the surface and all of it, kind of leading, I think, up to the scene at the party where she like spills the wine onto the expensive couch as she confronts her husband's lover at this party. But yeah, I asked the question about like what the F happened, because I think the ending is very much like up to interpretation, and I think that why the ending works so well is because I think the psychological thriller part of this is that this couple that comes to visit, played by Odessa Young and Logan Lerman, they really, I think, are supposed to be like avatars in Shirley's mind for a lot of these things, and whether they're real or not, I think they're probably real, but I think a lot of the things that you portray or that you see don't actually happen or are fictionalized by Shirley, are supposed to be like telling of her process, her writing process. And by all accounts, Shirley Jackson dealt with her own mental health issues throughout her life. She died at a fairly young age, I believe like 47 or 48, from drinking, smoking, being overweight. So obviously a very troubled person. She dealt with a lot of anxiety, agoraphobia. So that's all I think portrayed pretty well in this movie. And I think I like the fact that this is very like artsy in that sense, that you kind of get to interpolate these scenes the way that you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't know like Shirley Jackson history, and I didn't. I've read The Lottery, the short story. That's it though. You understand that this story is kind of leading up to her writing that one of her novels, for what's called the H name, the Hang something.
Hang a Man. Sorry.
Right. And the plot of that book is kind of based off of what's actually happening with Odessa Young's character. So you can kind of, maybe you can predict more of the narrative if you're aware of that history. I was not before this. I think Odessa Young and Logan Lerman, like you said, they are kind of our stand-ins, but I was not expecting to see Rose and Shirley develop kind of like a relationship of sorts, and there's allusions to some sexual tension later on, and the kind of the caregiver nature of it, right? And it ends up being
Right.
the narrative ends up being more about like a comment on like, I guess, gender dynamics and expectations at the time. It's taking place, I believe, in the early 50s, right after the lottery was written. And that's again unexpected. You don't think it's going that way when you first start watching the film. And yeah, I think ultimately it just those kind of dreamy sequences, those weird vibes that the camera helps sell. I think of scenes like when they're in the woods with the mushrooms and stuff, and it's not like a scene where they're gonna do mushrooms and just fucking trip out of their balls. It's not actually about that at all, but it alludes to going that way, and it's just kind of like forging the bonds between those two characters. So that's probably what I'm gonna take away from most. I mean, Michael Stahlberg plays Shirley's husband, Stanley Edgar Hyman, the critic, and he actually ends up being quite a malevolent character once you understand what's going on a little bit more. So, yeah, I think it's quite a strong movie, and I haven't seen Decker's other films, but it definitely stands out for kind of its artistic flourishes. And also shout out the filming of this. It's at Bennington College in Vermont for setting wise, but they actually filmed that at Vassar College, which is right in my hometown. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, you talked about the cinematography, which is done by Sturla Brandis Grevian, and the scene that really stands out to me with that like dreaminess, where you're almost like not sure if it's happening or not, is when not Shirley, Rose kind of finds the book, and Shirley kind of it tells her that this is how they keep track of who's going to sleep with the professor and all that, and then Shirley kind of like walks away and goes and locks herself in the room, and Rose kind of breaks in, and just like the way that's shot, just like I felt like I had no idea if that was actually happening at times or not. It like spins around and like looks at Rose and then kind of cuts back to Shirley, and then Shirley with Stanley in the room. It's just very like surreal in a lot of senses, and that like off kilterness, especially as the movie kind of goes further and further into, I think like the supposed to be madness of Shirley Jackson's mind, and how she came to write these amazing stories. I think it's just so perfectly paired, like with the tone and the way it was shot. It was really, really a strong film, and I think Elizabeth Moss, depending on what movies we all get to see this year and what gets nominated, I think she might have an outside shot at maybe a nom. So definitely one of the strongest actors of our time, or at least right now.